I didn't know the exact moment I would lose my family. I thought it would be something dramatic, a screaming match, a slammed door, a final unforgivable insult. Instead, it happened quietly in my parents' living room, surrounded by folding chairs, half-empty paper plates, and relatives who had known me my entire life, but suddenly looked at my husband like he was a criminal. The accusation came from my aunt first. Her voice was sharp, theatrical, almost excited as she announced that her designer purse was missing. She said it loudly enough for everyone to hear. Then she looked straight at us, at my husband, standing beside me with our 2-year-old daughter in his arms, and said, "Well, I think we all know where it went." The room went silent. I remember the sound of my daughter's tiny fingers gripping my husband's shirt. I remember the heat rushing to my face. I remember waiting, just for a second, for someone to laugh and say this was a misunderstanding. No one did. My parents didn't defend us. My sister didn't say a word, until she did. She tilted her head, pretending to be thoughtful, and said maybe we'd been struggling financially lately. She implied we were living beyond our means. She implied temptation. And just like that, the narrative was written. People I grew up with started nodding. Someone said they'd noticed my husband near the guest rooms earlier. Someone else claimed my husband had admired the purse before. No proof, no logic, just assumption. I looked at my parents, my own parents, waiting for them to stop it. Instead, my father asked us to leave until things calmed down. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not because of the accusation, but because my family didn't even hesitate. They chose comfort. They chose reputation. They chose my sister. And they chose to sacrifice my husband, and by extension, me. As we packed our bags under watchful eyes, my husband didn't say a word. He just held our daughter tighter while I swallowed the humiliation burning in my throat. That night, driving away from the house I grew up in, I realized something terrifying. The family I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from never actually existed. And once you see that truth, you can never unsee it. I grew up in a small town where people measured your worth in familiar ways. How often you showed up for family dinners, how politely you smiled at church, how convincingly you could pretend nothing was wrong. From the outside, my childhood looked normal. 2 parents, a house with a yard, holiday photos where everyone wore matching sweaters and forced the same tight, practiced grin. But inside that house, there was always a hierarchy. And I learned it early. My younger sister, Sarah, was the sun. Everything orbited around her, her moods, her achievements, her mistakes that were never called mistakes. My parents adored her with a softness I rarely received. When Sarah laughed, my mother lit up. When Sarah cried, my father moved mountains. When Sarah messed up, it was always a misunderstanding, or she's just sensitive. When I did well, it was fine, expected. I can still hear it, my voice trembling with pride at the kitchen table, telling my parents I'd made honor roll. My mother barely glanced up from her coffee. "That's nice, honey." A month later, Sarah brought home a B+ on a difficult test, and my parents bought her a new phone because she'd worked so hard. It sounds petty when you say it out loud, like you're jealous, like you're keeping score. But favoritism doesn't ruin you in one dramatic moment. It ruins you in the 1,000 quiet ones, when you learn that love is conditional, and the conditions were never designed for you to win. By high school, I didn't even ask for praise. I chased it privately, in grades, in part-time jobs, in anything that proved I was worth noticing. And the moment I graduated, I left. College in the city felt like breathing for the first time. No comparisons, no constant reminder that I would always be second place in my own family. I worked my way through school with part-time jobs, then stayed in the city after graduation and built a career in marketing. It wasn't glamorous at first. I started at the bottom, staying late, taking on extra projects, trying to prove myself to people who didn't even know my family's story. But I liked that. I liked that my success was mine. And that was where I met Ethan, my husband. We connected in a way that felt so easy it almost scared me. We bonded over obscure indie bands, ridiculous B-movies, and that strange comfort of laughing at the same stupid things. Ethan was steady, thoughtful, the kind of man who didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the strongest presence. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was looking at me and seeing me, not my role in a family script. We dated 3 years before we got married, not because we were hesitant, but because we were careful. We wanted a marriage that wasn't built on desperation. We wanted to choose each other with clear eyes. When our daughter, Lily, was born, my world narrowed into something simple and fierce, protecting this little life, building a home where love didn't have to be earned. Ethan was an incredible father. Gentle, patient, the kind of man who could calm Lily with nothing but the sound of his voice. Watching him with her made me love him in a deeper way than romance, like gratitude mixed with awe. My family, though, never really made space for him. They were polite in that small-town way, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, compliments that sounded like evaluations. Ethan did his best, always. He remembered birthdays, sent holiday cards, encouraged me to call my parents even when I didn't want to. But there was one point of constant tension. We were raising Lily bilingual. Ethan is French-Canadian, and it mattered to him that Lily grew up hearing his language, knowing his culture. To me, it was beautiful, this gift of identity and connection. To my parents, it was unnecessary, confusing, a phase. They criticized everything, cloth diapers, our routines, our choices, like our parenting was a personal insult to them. And still, despite all of it, I kept trying. Because a part of me, some stubborn, bruised part, still wanted to believe that if I showed up enough, if I tried hard enough, if I brought my daughter into their lives like a peace offering, maybe my family would finally treat me like I belonged. That hope was the reason we agreed to attend the reunion. And that hope was the reason the betrayal hurt as much as it did. Because I didn't just walk into my parents' house that weekend. I walked in carrying the last fragile thread of belief that they would choose me. They didn't. The reunion didn't explode immediately. That's the part that still messes with my head. How normal it felt at first. How easy it would have been to believe this time might be different if you weren't watching closely. The house was loud in that chaotic, familiar way. Folding chairs everywhere. Kids running between rooms. My mother bustling around the kitchen like hosting was her favorite performance. Laughter drifted through the open windows, mixing with the smell of grilled food and cheap perfume. Ethan stayed close to me, not because he was nervous, but because he knew me. He could feel my tension even when I smiled. "Are you okay?" he murmured more than once, brushing Lily's hair away from her face. "I'm fine," I kept saying, because that's what I've been trained to say my whole life. Sarah was in her element. She moved through the house like she owned it, kids clinging to her legs, relatives praising her patience, her motherhood, her sacrifice. My parents hovered near her, doting, proud, soaking it all in. Every time someone complimented her, my mother glanced at me, as if waiting for my reaction. I learned long ago not to give her one. The subtle comments started early. "City life must be expensive," an aunt remarked, eyeing my jacket a little too long. "You two seem busy," my father said pointedly. "Hard to visit anymore." Sarah laughed and added, "Well, some people prioritize careers." It wasn't an accusation, not directly, but it landed exactly where it was meant to. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. He always did that, anchored me without making a show of it. The second day was worse. Tensions rise when people get tired, when alcohol flows, when old resentments feel safer to voice because everyone's distracted. I remember stepping away to change Lily's diaper, looking for a quiet room. The guest rooms were mostly empty, doors cracked open, bags half unpacked. I moved quickly, focused on my daughter, unaware that this completely innocent moment would later be twisted into something ugly. When we came back downstairs, I felt it before I heard it. The energy had shifted. My Aunt Linda stood near the staircase, her face flushed, voice rising. "I know I put it right here," she kept repeating, waving her hands dramatically. "I'm not careless." People gathered around her. Murmurs rippled through the room. "What's wrong?" I asked. She turned slowly, eyes sharp, and said, "My purse is missing." I froze. I didn't know why, only that a familiar dread crawled up my spine. The kind you feel when you've been blamed before, when you recognize the pattern before it finishes forming. Linda's gaze moved past me, to Ethan. He shifted Lily to his other hip instinctively, his posture protective without being aggressive. "Well," Linda said, drawing out the word, "there are a few people here who aren't exactly locals." The implication hung heavy in the air. I laughed once, nervously. "Are you serious?" She ignored me. "I saw him upstairs earlier," she said, "near the bedrooms." My stomach dropped. "He was changing our daughter," I said quickly. "I was with him." No one responded. Sarah tilted her head, feigning concern. "I just think it's strange," she said softly. "You know, with how expensive things are these days." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "Nothing. Just people do things when they're under pressure." I looked at my parents then, really looked. My mother's lips were pressed tight. My father avoided my eyes. Not a single one of them said, "That's enough." Not one asked for proof. Not one suggested searching the house. They let it grow. More voices joined in. Someone mentioned a missing toy from a past gathering. Someone else said Ethan had admired the purse earlier. Another relative nodded, like they'd always suspected something was off about us. I watched the story being written in real time, and I understood something terrifying. This wasn't about a purse. This was about finally having an excuse. An excuse to confirm every quiet judgment they'd held about me for years. I wasn't the golden child. I wasn't the one who stayed. I wasn't the one who played by their rules. And now they had permission to punish me for it. The moment everything truly collapsed didn't come with shouting. It came with a decision. My father cleared his throat. That sound, small, ordinary, cut through the noise, sharper than any scream. "I think," he said slowly, "it would be best if you two stepped out for now, just until things calm down." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "Stepped out?" I repeated. "You want us to leave?" He didn't look at Ethan when he answered. He looked at the floor. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" My chest tightened so fast it felt like I couldn't breathe. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it, "they're accusing my husband of stealing, without proof, without even looking." My mother finally spoke. "No one is accusing anyone," she said quickly. "We just need space." Space. That word, so polite, so bloodless, was being used to exile us. Linda crossed her arms dramatically. "If you have nothing to hide, leaving shouldn't be a problem." Ethan shifted beside me. I could feel his body tense, not in anger, but in restraint. He had always been careful around my family. Too careful, maybe. Like he understood instinctively that one wrong move would confirm every ugly assumption they already held. "Is this really happening?" I asked Sarah. She avoided my eyes. "Let's not make a scene." That was it. That was the inciting fracture. They weren't just failing to defend us. They were actively choosing the version of events that hurt us the most, because it was easier, because it kept the hierarchy intact. My daughter started crying then, a sharp, confused wail that cut through the room. I reached for her automatically, my hands trembling as I took her from Ethan's arms. "It's okay," I whispered into her hair, even though nothing was okay. "Mama's here." No one moved to comfort her. Not my mother, not my father, not my sister. People watched, like spectators. Linda's voice rose again. "If the purse turns up missing, I will be calling the police." Something inside me snapped. "Do it," I said, my voice low but steady. "Call them. I have nothing to hide." The room went very still. Ethan finally spoke. "We'll leave," he said calmly. "Not because we're guilty, but because our daughter doesn't deserve this." That was the moment the humiliation truly settled in. We packed in silence. Every movement felt exposed, like hands were counting our belongings, like eyes were tracking our every step. I could feel the suspicion pressing in from all sides. Someone followed us upstairs to help. Someone else stood near the door. It was subtle, quiet, and utterly degrading. As we walked toward the car, Linda announced loudly that she would be filing a police report. Not later, not maybe, definitely. I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice anymore. The drive home was brutal. Lily cried herself to sleep in the back seat. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel and one resting lightly on my knee, grounding me, reminding me I wasn't alone. I stared out the window, watching the town disappear behind us. That was when the questions started looping in my mind. How did it escalate so fast? Why did no one stop it? Why did my parents, who had watched me grow up, who knew my character, believe the worst so easily? And then the darkest realization surfaced. They didn't need proof. They only needed permission. Permission to see me as expendable. When we got home, Ethan locked the door behind us and leaned against it like his legs had finally given out. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I should have said more." I turned to him then, finally letting the tears fall. "You didn't do anything wrong," I whispered. "They did." But even as I said it, a heavier truth settled in my chest. This wasn't just a bad family moment. This was a rupture. Something had broken that could never fully be repaired. And deep down, I knew, no matter what happened next, my relationship with my family would never be the same. The days after the reunion felt unreal, like walking through fog that refused to lift. I kept replaying the scene in my head, obsessively, as if I could find the exact moment where I should have said something different, spoken louder, fought harder, demanded proof, forced them to choose. But the truth I kept circling back to was unbearable. They had chosen. The police came 3 days later. 2 officers stood in our living room, polite but distant, their notepads out, their eyes trained on Ethan like he was something that needed to be assessed. They asked routine questions. Where were we staying during the reunion? Did Ethan go upstairs alone? Did we have any financial difficulties? Each question felt like another cut. Ethan answered calmly, honestly. He never raised his voice. He never lost his composure. I watched him, this man I trusted with my life, reduced to defending his integrity because my family couldn't be bothered to defend him. Lily sat on my lap the entire time, clinging to me like she sensed something was wrong. When the officers left, having found nothing, Ethan exhaled slowly and rubbed his face with his hands. I hate that she saw that, he said quietly, glancing at our daughter. So do I whispered. What hurt the most wasn't the police visit. It was the silence afterward. No call from my parents, no apology from Sarah, no message checking if Lily was okay. Instead, my phone buzzed nonstop with extended family members, people who hadn't spoken to me in years, suddenly full of opinions. Some demanded we return the purse. Others suggested we apologize to keep the peace. A few warned us not to make things worse by escalating. Escalating, as if we had started this. I started questioning myself in quiet, dangerous ways. Did I miss something? Was there a moment I ignored? Was I naive to bring Ethan into this family? I hated myself for those thoughts, but they crept in anyway. Ethan noticed before I admitted it. One night, after Lily finally fell asleep, he sat beside me on the couch and took my hands. You're not responsible for their behavior, he said gently. I know, I replied automatically. He studied my face. You don't believe that yet. And he was right. Because when you grow up in a family where love is conditional, your instinct isn't anger, it's self-blame. I thought about every holiday I'd attended despite the anxiety, every criticism I swallowed, every time I'd told Ethan, they mean well, even when they didn't. I had built bridges they were always willing to burn. Then, 2 weeks later, the truth came out. Not through my parents, not through an apology, but through gossip. A distant cousin called, voice hesitant, and said, I thought you should know. The purse was found. Found. In Sarah's house. Her 7-year-old son had taken it as a prank. I sat there in stunned silence as the cousin explained that my nephew had hidden it in his closet, panicked when things escalated, and finally confessed. I felt something strange then. Not relief. Clarity. Because what happened next told me everything I needed to know about my family. They didn't call us. They didn't apologize. They didn't rush to clear Ethan's name. Instead, they tried to handle it quietly, to protect Sarah, to protect the image of her family, to make sure no one talked about it. They were willing to let my husband remain suspected, willing to let our reputation rot, willing to let our daughter grow up with this stain. As long as Sarah was safe, I called my parents that night. I demanded an explanation. And for the first time in my life, I didn't soften my words. I didn't cushion the truth. I told them how deeply they'd hurt us, how their silence was betrayal, how they had failed, not just as parents, but as human beings. My mother cried, my father denied, Sarah minimized. It followed the script perfectly. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. I stopped hoping they would understand. I stopped needing them to. Because I realized that protecting my family, my real family, meant accepting a painful truth. Sometimes the people who raised you are not the people who deserve access to your life. Once the truth was out, I expected, naively, for things to slow down, for apologies to arrive, for shame to kick in, for my parents to realize the damage they had done and rush to repair it. Instead, everything escalated, quietly at first, then relentlessly. My parents' response wasn't remorse, it was containment. They treated the revelation like an inconvenience, not a reckoning, something to manage, something to smooth over before it embarrassed the family any further. It was just a misunderstanding, my mother kept saying when I finally got her on the phone. Things got out of hand. Out of hand. As if my husband being accused of theft, interrogated by police, and publicly humiliated was some unfortunate scheduling error. I asked her why they hadn't called us immediately when the purse was found. There was a pause on the line. We didn't want to upset you if it turned out not to be relevant. Not relevant. I felt something go cold inside me. So Ethan being accused wasn't upsetting, I asked. Our daughter watching strangers question her father wasn't upsetting? She cried then, loud, dramatic sobs that used to disarm me. I don't understand why you're attacking us, she said. We're the ones trying to hold the family together. And there it was, the emotional reversal. Suddenly, I was the problem, for refusing to pretend this never happened. My father took over the conversation after that. He was angry, defensive, loud. He accused me of overreacting, of making things worse, of turning everyone against the family. He even suggested that if we'd been around more often, people would have trusted us more. That sentence hit me like a slap, because it confirmed what I had feared all along. Trust in my family wasn't built on character. It was built on proximity and compliance. I reminded him, calmly, clearly, of every time they'd chosen Sarah over me. Every time they dismissed my feelings. Every time I'd swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. I brought up specifics. The graduation they barely acknowledged. The visits they skipped. The constant criticism of our parenting. My father didn't deny it. He just said, "You're too sensitive." That was when I knew. Nothing I said would ever matter to him, because admitting the truth would shatter the story he'd been telling himself for decades. Sarah tried calling next. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail instead. Her voice was soft, cautious, almost apologetic, but not quite. "I didn't mean to accuse you," she said. "Things just happened so fast. I was caught up in the moment. I hope we can move past this for the kids." The kids. She never said Ethan's name. Never acknowledged what she implied. Never apologized for the damage. Her message wasn't about accountability. It was about access. About keeping things comfortable. I deleted it without responding. That decision alone seemed to ignite a second wave of chaos. Extended family members began choosing sides. Some reached out quietly, embarrassed, apologetic. A few admitted they'd always noticed how my parents favored Sarah but never said anything. Others went on the offensive. They told me I was tearing the family apart, that I should forgive and forget, that family is family. One aunt even suggested I apologize, to smooth things over. Apologize. For being falsely accused. For defending my husband. For refusing to accept mistreatment. The pressure became constant. Messages, calls, passive-aggressive posts on social media about family loyalty and forgiveness. Ethan watched all of this unfold with growing concern. One night, after Lily fell asleep, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I'll support whatever you decide," he said carefully. "But we need to talk about boundaries." That word, boundaries, felt heavy, because I knew what it meant. He wasn't asking me to cut them off. He was asking me to protect us. "I don't want Lily growing up thinking this is normal," he continued. "That love means humiliation. That loyalty means silence." I stared at my hands, fingers knotted together. "I've spent my whole life managing them," I admitted, smoothing things over, being the reasonable one. "And where has that gotten you?" he asked gently. The answer was obvious. It had gotten me here, questioning my own worth while defending people who wouldn't defend me. That was when we made the decision. Not dramatic, not impulsive, intentional. We would step back. We wouldn't cut contact completely, but we would stop chasing it. We blocked the relatives who kept harassing us. We stopped responding to guilt-laced messages. We told my parents, clearly, that we needed space, and that any future contact would require respect and accountability. They didn't take it well. My mother accused me of punishing her. My father accused me of holding grudges. Sarah accused me of being dramatic. But for the first time in my life, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't try to convince them. I simply chose my family, not the one I was born into, the one I was building. And as the noise slowly faded, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter, not healed, not okay, but free from the exhausting responsibility of fixing what I didn't break. Distance didn't bring peace right away. It brought silence. And silence has a way of echoing all the doubts you've been avoiding. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Ethan's steady breathing beside me, wondering if I had done the right thing, or if I had just destroyed the last fragile connection to the people who raised me. I miss my parents in irrational ways, not who they were, but who I wish they had been. I miss the idea of a mother who would defend my husband without hesitation, a father who would say, "This isn't who my daughter is," a sister who would step in and stop the narrative before it poisoned everything. But wishing didn't change reality. What hurt the most was watching how the fallout affected Ethan. He never complained. He still laughed with Lily, still packed her lunch, still kissed my forehead every morning like nothing was wrong. But I saw it in the small things. The way he hesitated before answering unknown calls, the way he double-checked locks at night, the way he grew quiet when family came up in conversation. One evening, I found him standing in the hallway, staring at the framed photo from our wedding. "Do you regret marrying into this?" I asked quietly. He turned to me immediately. "No." Not a pause, not a doubt. "I regret that you were treated this way," he continued, "but I'd choose you again, every time." I broke down then. Because love like that doesn't demand loyalty at the expense of your dignity. It protects it. Still, the guilt gnawed at me. My parents started sending sporadic messages, short, neutral, loaded with subtext. "We miss Lily. Families go through rough patches. Life is too short for grudges." They never said sorry. They never acknowledged the harm. And the part of me that had been trained to keep the peace whispered, Maybe this is just how families are. Maybe you're expecting too much. Maybe you should be the bigger person." That voice was loudest on the hardest day. Lily had her first real meltdown at daycare. Her teacher called to say she'd been unusually withdrawn, crying for her dad, refusing to nap. They asked if anything had changed at home. I hung up and sat in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Had our family drama spilled into her world? Was I hurting her by cutting ties? That night, after Lily finally fell asleep curled against Ethan's chest, I sat alone in the dark living room and let myself feel it all. The grief, the anger, the shame. I cried for the child I used to be, the girl who learned early that love was uneven and approval had to be earned. I cried for the woman I became, the one who kept hoping things would change if she just tried harder. And I cried for the family I thought I had. That was the lowest point. Not rage, not confrontation, just grief. Grief for something that was never truly mine. I thought about reaching out, about apologizing just to make the pain stop, about letting them back in, even without accountability. And then Lily stirred in her sleep. She whispered, half dreaming, "Mama." That single word grounded me, because I knew, deep in my bones, that teaching her to accept disrespect in the name of family would be the real betrayal. I realized then that walking away wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. But clarity doesn't erase pain. It just gives it meaning. And in that darkness, something else began to form. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but resolve. The turning point didn't come with fireworks. It came with a conversation I wasn't expecting. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, Jake, called me one afternoon while Lily was at daycare and Ethan was at work. We'd grown up together, but drifted apart the way people do when family dynamics quietly decide who matters and who doesn't. "I hope this isn't intrusive," he said carefully. "I just wanted to say, I'm on your side." That sentence alone made my throat tighten. He told me he'd been uncomfortable at the reunion, that he'd seen how quickly the accusations piled on, how no one stopped to question it. "I didn't know how to speak up in the moment," he admitted, "but I know what I saw, and I know what your family did to you wasn't right." Then he said something that changed everything. "You weren't the only one." He told me stories I'd never heard before, other cousins who'd been scapegoated, aunts who'd learned to stay quiet to avoid conflict, relatives who'd watched favoritism play out for decades but never named it out loud. "It's always been Sarah," he said gently, "and your parents built everything around protecting that image." Hearing it from someone outside my immediate circle shattered the last illusion I was holding on to. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Jake offered to mediate if I ever wanted family therapy. He didn't pressure me, didn't guilt me, just made the option visible. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. For the first time, I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong, and started asking a different question. What do I want my life to look like now? That night, Ethan and I talked, really talked, about boundaries, about contact, about what kind of family we wanted Lily to grow up in. We decided to send one message. Not a plea, not an argument, a statement. We wrote it together, word by word. We told my parents and Sarah that we were stepping back, that the accusations, the lack of apology, and the years of favoritism had caused real harm. That we were open to rebuilding, but only if it included accountability, respect, and changed behavior. We set boundaries clearly. No surprise visits, no gossip, no minimizing what happened, no criticism of our parenting or our marriage. And we made one thing explicit. If Ethan wasn't respected, neither was I. Sending that message felt terrifying, but also freeing. The responses came in waves. My parents replied first. It was long, emotional, part apology, part justification. They admitted they could have handled things better. They expressed fear of losing Lily. They suggested therapy. But even in their attempt at reflection, they couldn't fully let go of deflection. Still, it was more than I'd ever gotten before. Sarah's response was different. Defensive, minimizing, framing herself as overwhelmed, suggesting we were overreacting and hurting the kids. She apologized for how things were perceived, not for what she did. And that told me everything. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, but because I finally understood something crucial. Closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from acceptance. Acceptance that some people are unwilling or unable to change. In the weeks that followed, something shifted inside me. I started therapy, individual sessions, no agenda beyond understanding myself. I learned words for things I'd felt my whole life but never named: scapegoating, conditional love, emotional neglect. I learned that strength isn't endurance. It's discernment. And slowly, deliberately, I stopped centering my family of origin in my story. I centered the family I was building. the fallout didn't look the way I expected. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public reckoning, no sudden awakening. Instead, the consequences unfolded quietly, like gravity finally catching up to something that had been unstable for years. Once we stepped back, the narrative my family had relied on began to crack. Without me there to absorb blame, smooth conflicts, or play the reasonable one, the tension they'd ignored for decades had nowhere to go. It turned inward. Extended family members started asking questions. Why had Ethan been accused so quickly? Why hadn't anyone apologized once the truth came out? Why was everything always about protecting Sarah? Some of them reached out to me privately, tentative at first, then more openly. I should have spoken up. I didn't realize how bad it was. I see it now. Others doubled down. They called me cold, unforgiving, dramatic. But their words didn't land the way they used to. Because for the first time, my sense of worth wasn't dependent on their approval. Sarah, in particular, struggled. Without me in the background managing relationships and absorbing criticism, she became the focal point. Relatives started noticing things they'd overlooked before: her entitlement, her tendency to deflect, her need to be centered in every situation. The golden glow faded. My parents felt it too. They started reaching out more frequently, not with apologies, but with worry. The family felt different, they said. Disconnected, unsettled. I understood what they meant. They had lost the person who kept the illusion intact. But I wasn't interested in returning to that role. At home, something else was happening. Ethan relaxed. It was subtle but real. He laughed more easily. He stopped checking his phone so often. He slept better. One night he told me, "I didn't realize how much tension I was carrying until it was gone." Hearing that made every difficult choice worth it. Lily thrived. Her meltdowns faded, her laughter returned. She became more confident, more expressive. She didn't ask about my parents anymore. Children adapt quickly when the environment becomes safe. That truth hit me harder than any argument ever could. The hardest moment came unexpectedly. My Aunt Linda, the one whose purse started everything, sent a message. It was brief. "I'm sorry if things got out of hand." She talked more about her embarrassment than about the harm she caused, more about how people saw her than what Ethan and I endured. I thanked her politely and kept my distance. An apology that centers the person offering it isn't really an apology. Jake continued to check in. He told me my parents were struggling with the loss of control more than the loss of connection, that they couldn't understand why boundaries felt like punishment. I didn't correct him, because understanding isn't required for boundaries to be valid. We skipped the next family gathering, then the next. The world didn't end. Instead, we filled our time with friends, people who showed up without obligation, who respected our choices, who loved Ethan not in spite of him, but because of who he was. We planned a small vacation. Just the three of us. No drama, no expectations, no walking on eggshells. On the beach, watching Lily chase waves with fearless joy, I realized something profound. Peace feels boring when you're used to chaos. But boring is safe, and safe is everything. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. I felt like myself for the first time in a long time. My family hadn't apologized. They hadn't changed, but they no longer had power over my life. And that, quietly, undeniably, was the consequence of their choices. I used to believe family was something you endured, something you bent yourself into shape for, because blood demanded loyalty, even when it came with pain. I don't believe that anymore. What happened at that reunion wasn't just a misunderstanding or a single bad moment. It was a mirror, held up without mercy, showing me exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy. And once you see that truth, you have two choices. Shrink yourself to fit the role they've assigned you, or step away and build something healthier. I chose the second. Not because it was easy, not because it didn't hurt, but because my husband deserved better than suspicion. Because my daughter deserved a home where love isn't conditional, and because I deserved to stop proving my worth to people who had already decided I was expendable. I didn't get the apology I wanted. I didn't get the accountability I hoped for. What I got was clarity. I learned that protecting your peace isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. That boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept that not every relationship can be saved. Our life is quieter now. We're not surrounded by extended family gatherings or forced smiles. We don't perform closeness. We don't feel. Instead, we wake up in a home filled with laughter, with trust, with safety. Ethan and I are stronger than we've ever been. Not because we avoided conflict, but because we chose each other when it mattered most. Lily is growing up knowing that love doesn't come with strings attached, that she doesn't have to earn affection by being small, obedient, obedient or silent. And me? I'm learning that walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally chose yourself. If you're listening to this and you're standing at that same crossroads, wondering whether to keep trying or whether to let go, I hope you know this. You are not obligated to accept mistreatment just because it comes from family. Healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like peace, and peace is worth everything.